and good morning to other participants and colleagues. I have been following closely for the past few years the work on this forum with keen interest as to when the climate change discussion would be engaged prominently. And I must say I'm very excited with the presentation that has been coming. My name, as indicated, I'm Tlou Ramaru. I am responsible for climate change adaptation with DFFE. Responsible for, among other things, developing the climate change adaptation strategy. So I'm going to get straight into it. And I think other speakers have already touched on the fact that climate change is a reality and we are experiencing the impact of climate change. And we, as a country, we are party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC. We are participating in the engagement and the negotiations, and we have signed the Paris Agreement, which is a global agreement to try, among other things, to address the issues of climate change. The slide that I'm projecting right now starts talking about the global surface temperature increases above the pre-industrials. It simply means that in the Paris Agreement, there is an agreement that as a global society, we need to reduce the emissions and keep the world to be warming below 2 degrees Celsius, but preferably below 1.5. So when you see those red dots up there, 2024, in 2024, it was the first year where the global temperatures have surpassed the 1.5, and we will be watching with keen interest on whether this will become permanent or it was just one peculiar year where the temperature has really went past the agreed goal of keeping it to 1.5. So what it basically means that is if the current emissions are not really kept, we are going to see an increased warming, which will make various sectors very difficult to adapt to the impact of climate change. And I think Sylvester has touched on this, where you will have increased frequencies in terms of extreme event, but also the intensity of this extreme event. You'll start seeing the intensity of this extreme event taking place. And I think he also touched on the fact that the southern region seems to be even warming way higher than the global trend. And here on this slide, I'm just showing some of the implication of the southern region, of which South Africa is not immune to. Drought in Zambia there in 2024, severe impact on the agriculture, affecting, of course, the growing season and leading to an acute food insecurity. Just across the border, Zambia and Zimbabwe, there more than 70% of the maize crop lost due to drought and severe impact on the livestock. And you could see another picture there depicting the hippopotamus stuck in a dried up, channel in the Okavango Delta in 2023-24. So these provide a very clear reality that if we don't really cap these emissions, we're gonna live in a very difficult world where it will be characterized by drought, heat waves, heat strokes that will intensify. And as a country, we have had our own fair share of these impacts. These are some of the impacts that I think most of the presenters, have touched on, from Sion, SANSA, WRC, and many others, where we'll, start to have the linkages of this climate change to the environmental degradation, the linkages in terms of the severe weather, the fatalities, the destructions of homes and infrastructure, heat waves, heat-related illnesses, which will also be, one of the key areas. Degraded living conditions that will be exacerbated, of course, by the socio-economic aspects, which includes, among other things, poverty, which makes, the communities that are becoming more vulnerable. But change is also in the vector-borne diseases, climate-induced diseases such as malaria and so forth, and water and food supply, which it has become the theme of this engagement. You'll start to see a lot of impact on the water and a lot of impact on the food supply, which will be, of course, affected by the agricultural yields that would be, compromised due to climate change. But the issue of water quality as well becomes, one of the key areas that would be a challenge, because when you start experiencing floodings, in the Eastern Cape, floodings across Gauteng, that affects the infrastructure, water infrastructure, thereby affecting the quality of water, as we have seen in KZN, where there was a 2022 serious flooding that have destroyed quite a significant amount of infrastructure. This is just to say climate change is a reality. A case study here is KZN 2022. We have seen the severe flooding there. We have seen over 400 people fatalities there. We've seen over 40,000 that were, missing and displaced, and nearly 4,000 houses were destroyed. But I think of greater focus there is the multiple infrastructure that has been destroyed, and among those, the water infrastructure has, been impacted significantly. So this demonstrates clearly that as a country, we also feeling the brand of climate change, and you can, for colleagues that have been following the near day zero in Cape Town, the Knysna fires, all the way to the flooding in KZN, the Nelson Mandela Bay flooding, the drought in Northwest Limpopo, and drought in Mpumalanga. These are becoming a pattern of these extreme events that are coming at frequency. The heat stroke in the Northern Cape that I think created some fatalities in terms of the farmers. So this becomes a reality that climate change is going to affect, our sectors in a more severe way. Well, coming to the water element, and I think a lot of colleagues have touched on this, WRC have touched on this, where of course, climate change is expected to affect, among other things, the groundwater levels, which will include, among other things, the recharge, the storage, the discharge, and the quality of water. And we have seen, even when we were undertaking the work on the scenarios, the long-term adaptation scenarios that have been produced, that you see, the issues of water security challenges that are partly attributed to the increase in climate variability. We all aware that we are a water scarce country, so the climate change factor bring in another element of an induced pressure, and bring the challenges in terms of water security. But again, the prolonged drought in the Eastern Cape, which of course affected the water supply. We have seen challenges in Gauteng as well, and we've seen challenges in Limpopo Northwest, and these are becoming frequent events that we need to address them. Well, the increase in extreme flooding that caused significant damage to infrastructure has been noted. But despite the strategic water sources areas, these are areas that are providing the better part of the water for the country, that support, of course, over half of the population of the country, 2/3 of the economic activities, 70% of irrigated agriculture, and 90% of urban consumers. These are the areas that I think we should, as a country, start focusing on in terms of building adaptation measures, building resilience to ensure that these strategic water sources areas are really protected. And we find this with the work that the Water and Sanitation Department is doing in their climate change response strategy for water and sanitation. On the agricultural side, I think there has been quite a number of recent events. One around in 2023, there was a severe heat wave in the Northern Cape that led to the death of farmers. And these also start to really affect not only the yields, but to affect the life of farmers that will be working in the farming areas. And I think the study by Stellenbosch Business School has also indicated that climate change will threaten up to 50% decline in the South African agricultural production by 2050. Could see in Zimbabwe and in Zimbabwe it was around 70%. And this clearly demonstrates that if nothing is done, there will be significant challenges in terms of our ability to feed most of the people in the country. And I think Professor have touched on these in terms of some of the projections that are coming out. And of course, the flip side of it, because of climate variability, there might be some of those crops that may increase in yields, particularly here. One that has been noted is the sugarcane, that there might be, a possibility there, taking into account the warmer and wetter projection in the tropical northeast to increase the yields. Well, the other part is the plant and animal diseases and insect distribution will also get severely affected by climate change. And I think one of the key things we should really understand the significance of the insects in terms of pollination, where they were able to really facilitate in some areas crop pollination. So this will affect to a greater extent the crop and livestock production if it gets, if no resilient and adaptation measures are put in place. This is just to provide the background on the work that we're doing in the National Department of Environment, where we build various, policy instruments, that would then enable the different sectors and the different spheres of society to can work collaboratively with to address the issues of climate change. One is the national white paper that has been developed, which outline very clearly from the adaptation point of view, what are some of the adaptation policy direction that we need to take as a country to address the various sectors. It covered the sectors on agriculture, water, human settlement, coastal areas, and many others. But we equally have the long-term adaptation scenarios. These are research, flagship research work that start to provide the projection of what the future climate would look like, do the analysis on what the impact would be on those sectors. It covered quite a number of sectors: agriculture, water, human settlement, the coastal areas as well. So this start to outline quite very significantly what the impact of climate change would look like to those various sectors that would then enable us to put measures in place. And it further goes on to make proposition on the adaptation measures that can be included. The other important tool or policy instrument is the National Adaptation Strategy. that become a common reference to all the sectors, covering over 6 sectors, that would then enable sectors to plan the adaptation measures. It covers tourism, it covers energy, it covers transport, it covers human settlement, it covers water, it covers agriculture, just to mention few. And this strategy enable us to communicate a long-term adaptation vision for the country, with a call for the sector, department, provincial department, and the local sphere of government to really integrate adaptation into their planning systems. The framework on risk and vulnerability assessment, and I think the first presenter did touch on the limitations that seems to be existing in the country in terms of the tools and the capacity to undertake the risk and vulnerability assessment. We have put together a framework on risk and vulnerability assessment for utilization by academia, for utilization by civil society movements, utilization by the spheres of government, so that they are able to undertake the customized based risk and vulnerability assessment, following the clear steps and guidance that the framework is offering, so that we can increase the pool of people that have the technical capability and skills to undertake the risk and vulnerability assessment. Climate Services Framework, which aims to bring, and I think that I was intrigued by the presentation from SANSA, the Space Agency, and SION, and the ARCs as well. So this framework brings different key stakeholders that are working on observations, that are able to collect data and produce the decision support tools. And I think all those colleagues have touched on the various decision support tools that they offer, so that we can start collaboratively working together to ensure that we are able to provide the users with different decision support tools that they would be guided in terms of enabling them to be able to adapt to the impact of climate change. And this, of course, is inclusive of the early warning systems, capacitation of the various sectors of society to can limit the risk of climate change. We have the Let's Response Toolkit, which aims at integrating climate change into the local government level, at the municipal level, where the municipalities now would be expected to undertake the risk and vulnerability assessment, but most importantly, be able to produce their district focused adaptation strategies and measures that will advance the implementation of the strategies. So the toolkit, Let's Response Toolkit, facilitates that. And I think that's where each and every sector will look, each and every district will look at the sectors that gets affected. But I think the last important one is the Climate Change Act, which has been signed into law by the president in recent time, has been promulgated for implementation this year, which starts to improve the governance of climate change in the country, covers largely both the mitigation and the adaptation, looking at the institutional makeups that will be required, providing a very clear mandate for key sectors like water to can be able to produce a clear water adaptation strategy, climate change response strategy for the water sector, agriculture to produce climate change response strategy for agriculture. In the main, I think the climate smart agriculture has already been mentioned. So those were some of the policy instruments that we develop, and we now currently seized with advancing the implementation of the Climate Change Act, and we working on the development of the adaptation scenarios. We will move to the impact modeling of the sectors, and coincidentally, we have already identified the priority sectors that we will commence with, which is water and agriculture as the key strategic sectors that will undertake an impact modeling and model the impacts that will based on the scenarios that those sectors will really feel from the brunt of climate change. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It just provides a few blocks in terms of, our engagement with various processes, the whole policy planning and governance. That's where we work with all these sectors: agriculture, water, health, coastal systems, and we work with them to ensure that they integrate and build adaptation response strategies. We work with the provinces where we help them to undertake the risk assessment and build their provincial response plans, and we work with the cities, working with the district, and we open now unlocking partnership with entities and private and sectors as well. We also participate in the international space where we at the center of advancing the country's position in being part of the global leadership to address the issues of climate change. And of particular, it's really the work in the IPCC. A lot of scientists from the country participate in the IPCC, producing those key scientific outputs, but even in the negotiations. Risk and vulnerability assessment will undertake significant work in supporting the local sphere, the provincial sphere, and other sectors. And I think Sion has already touched on some of the key server and elements like that. I'm not going to spend much time on that. But I think of critical importance is the community of practice, where we start looking at projects on ground to say what are the different projects that are being carried out on the ground. We have South African National Biodiversity Institute, SANBI, as one of the organizations that has been accredited to the Green Climate Fund at the global sphere, which is really supporting implementation of on-ground work. They are doing a lot of work on the ground. They've been focusing on community-based, adaptation work, focusing on climate-smart agriculture, and focusing on doing a lot of ecosystem-based adaptation on the ground. A project in Limpopo, a project in KZN, and they are now working on further projects that will be rolled out across the country. So this is one of the accredited entity that I would encourage colleagues to, be in touch with as well. We have the DBSA, Development Bank of Southern Africa, as well accredited to the DBSA as a regional bank that also access funding from the Green Climate Fund, the multilateral finance that support, on-ground implementation. And these are some of the work that we do. And I've touched on the climate services. Moving on, this is the rationale for the climate change adaptation strategy, which provides guidance, policy instruments, and it provides, of course, a common reference point for all the sectors, including water, including agriculture, to really integrate climate consideration in their response to the current climate-related challenges. We, as indicated, the President has signed the Climate Change Act into law. It has been promulgated for implementation. And I will just summarize the slides in terms of what are the key things that would be happening from the adaptation side of things. One of the key things is to have the provinces and the municipalities to really undertake a clear risk and vulnerability assessment, undertake the needs and response assessment at the province level, at the metropolitan level, or at the district level, so that they can really understand the risks that affect them, at that level, to ensure that we are able to tailor an adaptation or a resilient response to them. They will also be expected to develop the adaptation response plan associated with the implementation plan. And this is where the sector work, where others will be struggling with agriculture, others will be struggling with the coastal challenges, others will be struggling with water. So each and every district or province will have its own unique climate risks that we need to really focus on. The next set is focusing at the national level, where we need to, as a country, develop what we call the national adaptation objectives. And I think the work that has been done from different presentation, where policy interface with research enable us to draw from the information that is coming out of this forum to say what would be the national adaptation objective for the country, and that should come with the corresponding measures, how we're going to measure that, and which critical sectors we're going to look at. I mean, water would be one of the critical sector, and agriculture and many others. But we would then be expected as a country to provide a clear guidance on what adaptation objectives are and how we're going to measure them. As indicated, we're currently developing the adaptation scenarios, and these scenarios are just going to give us projections to say what is the future climate looking like, and how are we going to then ensure that we develop the adaptation strategy based on these scenarios. And I think most importantly, the sectors, and this will be more sector specific, they will be expected to develop a sector specific plans, which will include, among other things, the action plan on how we're going to address the issues of adaptation in the sectors. The water sector will stand out as one of the critical sector. Agriculture will stand out as one of the critical sector. And there should be an ongoing assessment in terms of how do we track progress. I think Sion, they spoke about the monitoring and evaluation system that is being developed that will enable us to track progress as a country, to be able to assess how are we doing in terms of responding to the climate change impacts. Mindful of time, this is just a slide that provides a little bit of brief background on what is happening at the municipal level. I'm going to jump that, go straight to the recommendation as I conclude, Chair, that one of the critical recommendations is the adaptation response strategy for water should be useful, and it should also look in terms of the governance level. How do you then deal with when you integrate climate aspect? It cannot only be at the national level, should look at the province, should look at the district level. How do we integrate climate change response at that level as part of the adaptation response approach within the water sector? But I think the protection of the strategic water sources areas, it's essential so that we can mitigate that against the impact of climate change. We've already seen the extent of how those water sources are then supplying water to the different ecosystem or economic systems of the country, to agriculture and to other production systems of the country. So the protection of the strategic water sources will be very central. The early warning system, I think Prof touched on this. This should tie very well with the early warning system for all by the United Nations, targeting 2027. So the organizations such as SANSA, Sion, South African Weather Service, ARC as well, in terms of their observation network, they remain very critical on how do you then, through the early warning system, you are able to provide the early warning for the country. But most importantly, when you want to tailor it to the decision-making tools to the agricultural sector, where you're able to provide them in terms of impact early warning system. If the seasons are changing, they are able to be informed when to be prepared to prepare their land for farming, and what type of crops then can be prioritized, taking into account the climate system that would have been observed. And the issue around integrated approach, I can't even start to emphasize it. I think Professor touched on this, but the ecosystem-based adaptation approaches, there was a question on these, on the ecosystem-based adaptation. I think it was phrased as the nature-based adaptation or nature-based responses. This is one of the approach that should be utilized where you start dealing with the rehabilitation of your wetlands, rehabilitation of areas that can address flood attenuations among other things. Focus on climate smart agriculture, as indicated. This is one of the critical area, and you can tap in terms of the different tools that are being produced. Yesterday, South African Biodiversity Institute has launched the climate change fact sheets, and these provide district focused projections in terms of what would the climate at the particular district look like. It provides a provincial focused projections. So when you are in that province, you are able to see what will be the suitable, crops that you would have to plant, the suitable animals, that livestock that you would have to farm in those areas. So this type of tools would be, in my view, very central to us adapting as a country. But finally, Chair, these are some of the tools for consideration. And the Global Change Institute with vets there on the district fact sheet, the Green Book with the CSIR, the Let's Response Toolkit, the framework on risk and vulnerability assessments. These are some of the interactive tools that can be tapped into to enable planning within the sector, the water sector and the agricultural sector, but planning wide for adaptation. Chair, I'm going to stop here and to really thank you for inviting us to share briefly the policy landscape and perspective from our side. And we believe we can also leverage from the various speakers and the work that the researchers are doing to, collaborate and build our adaptation measures going forward. Thank you, Chair.